I guess we're ready to go now. I'm Tom, and I'm an alcoholic. And I'm real happy to be with you this morning. What I want to talk to you about this morning is the problem that we have. I find that many alcoholics and drug-addicted people do not get well because they simply don't understand what's wrong with them. Okay? Now, I'm a sober person, and I've been sober for a long time. And when I talk with you about sobriety, I do not mean just not drinking or just not drugging. When I talk about sobriety, I mean a state of being which is characterized by freedom and happiness. You see, I found a way to live where I can stay high about 95% of the time without the use of drugs and alcohol. And it's a very important thing to me. Because of the kind of person that I am, I have to be high on something. Can any of you identify with that? And I'm high on living. I found a way of life that really keeps me high. And if it didn't, I'd probably still be using drugs and alcohol. Okay? How many of you are alcoholics? You prefer alcohol? Okay? How many are drug addicts? Okay? And how many pigs? Now, pigs are people like me. You know, when I call them pigs, be proud to be a pig. Okay? A pig is a guy like me who drinks everything too thin to chew and chews the rest of it. Okay? And pigs make it in this program also. Now, I believe, too, that sobriety is a learning process, that we learn how to be sober people. I really do believe that to the soles of my feet. And learning is not a spectator sport. There's no magic in this treatment center. There's no magic anywhere else that's going to fix us. We have to work to recover. And we have to work at least as hard as we work to get where we are right now. Have you ever taken the time to think how hard you have worked to be an alcoholic or a drug addict? Think about that sometime. You know, I remember one time in my life when in my underwear I stole a bicycle and rode through the snow about 10 miles to a bootlegger's house. You know? That takes strength. Sometimes people say we alcoholics are weak, you know, weak people. That we have weak egos. And we're among the greatest con artists on the face of the earth. We can manipulate and use anybody at any time. All of us can. And people with weak egos can't do that. You're going to hear a lot of things that society says about alcoholics and drug addicts that you're going to find are not true. Okay? So when I talk with you, basically what I'm trying to do is get you to think. I'd like to wind up those rubber bands in your heads. Did you know you had them? Any of you had a little model airplane, Benny? Did you have one and you wound that sucker up and you let it go and it flew, didn't it? We got them in our heads too. And we need to wind up these rubber bands and get thinking real serious about what is wrong with us, really wrong with us, and how to get well. Now, most of you, if I ask you what your problem was, you would say, and I hope you can see this. If you can, I'll write larger. Your problem is drinking and drugging. Right? That's my problem. You ask an alcoholic what his problem is, he says, I drank too much and I drank too long. And you ask a drug addict, well, drugs are my problem. Are they really? I want you to think about that for just a minute. Are they really a problem? Okay? Kenneth, why'd you use?
Because I had to.
Because you had to. But why? Why did you drink? Anybody. And why did you use drugs? Anybody. What was the reason? Made you feel good. Right? Isn't that simple? I drank because I wanted to feel good. For some reason I didn't. And in the big book Alcoholics Anonymous, you'll read in the doctor's opinion where the little doctor said men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. Feeling good. That's why we drink. Had another word for it too, didn't we? Being high. Huh? And the Greeks have a word for it. I really love this word. Euphoria. You know, every time I hear that word euphoria, I think about a seagull just floating over the ocean, floating over the waves, floating in the breeze, effortlessly, no work, okay, involved, just going where the breeze takes him. So we drank to feel good. We use drugs to feel good, to become euphoric, because for some reason we weren't. Now, is feeling good a problem? Anybody? Is it a problem? No, it's not a problem, is it? Feeling good, the effect of alcohol and drugs, is not a problem at all. As a matter of fact, for me, and I suspect for you, it was a solution. Think about it. For some reason, we didn't feel good when we drank and used drugs. We did. And so we kept on using them. Okay? The effect of drugs and alcohol, very important for us to understand if we're going to understand what is wrong with us to begin with. Okay? Now let's take it a little further. If drinking and drugging are not the problems, what is? Anybody, is it Kenny? Why didn't you feel good? Can you tell me? Or John? Let me suggest something. Any of you suffer from guilt? It's quite a suffering, isn't it, this guilt? It's persistent feeling of being wrong. Even when there's no reason for it, you feel like I'm wrong, I'm wrong, I'm wrong all the time. Any of you ever feel that way? You know? And when you did something well, you felt like you didn't do it good enough, so even when you succeeded, you were a little bit guilty about not doing better. And there's a reason for that. Okay? What other reasons didn't you feel good? Come on, tell me. Why didn't you feel good in the first place? Why did you have to have alcohol and drugs?
Anger.
Anger. That's a good one. What's another?
Loneliness.
What?
Self-pity. Loneliness.
Self-pity? Good one. Poor me. Everybody else in the world's got something I don't have, and I try to get it and I can't get it. Poor me. Okay? Somebody mentioned loneliness. It's a good one, all by yourself. Even when you go into a bar with 200 people in it, or into a party with 25 or 30 people in it, you feel like you're by yourself. They don't feel like you're by yourself. You know, they try to bring you into the group, but somehow you feel alone. You never feel a part of anything. I didn't. God knows I wanted in, and I tried to get in. But I felt, I'm not like them. I'm not like them. I don't fit. Even in my home when I was a kid, you know, my father was a big, tall, good-looking man with coal black hair. And my mom had dark brown hair, you know. And my sister had dark brown hair. And in the middle of them was me, Puddinhead, you know, with a great shock of white hair. And I used to lay around, even when I was a kid, and wonder, do I belong here? How did I get here from all these dark people? I just didn't understand it, you know. And I cried about it a lot. And I felt outside. And I felt outside in my classroom. I wasn't like them. Do you ever feel that way? I'm just not like them. I don't know what it is about me. But I'm not. Okay? Guilt, anger, self-pity, loneliness. How about depression? Any depressives out there? Pretty bad feeling, you know. You wake up in the morning, you want to pull the covers over your head and put the pillow on because you don't want to go out in the world and be with them. Them, you know. Them who talk about you and don't like you and put you down and are plotting against you. And so you crawl all up in yourself like this, you know, and say, I'm not going out there and let them get me. Any other reasons?
Shame.
Shame? Okay. Shame is a good one. That falls in the same category as guilt. And right on the bottom down here, and I hope you can see it, may be one of the biggest reasons of all. Fear. Fear. Lots of forms of fear. Always anticipating that we're going to lose something or that we're going to lack something, you know. Getting up in the middle of the night and walking into your child's room or running into your child's room and listening to see if your child's breathing. And then when you hear your child breathing, you put your ear on her chest like I used to do to see if her heart was beating because you're just sure she was going to die because of the way you were behaving. Fear. All forms of fear. Little worries, little dreads, things like that. All the way to fear number 207, I call it. Because I read a book once and a psychologist listed 206 fears and I'd had them all. But there's one fear he didn't have in the book. Fear number 207. But we've had it. The fear of impending doom, Kenneth. I don't know what's going to happen to me. I don't know where it's going to happen or why or when or who's going to do it, but something's going to happen to me and it's going to be bad. No reason for it. But you know that, don't you? You really know that. Something is going to happen, and that something is going to be bad. Now, the shrinks call that free-floating anxiety, okay? Mine didn't float, folks. Mine was like a stone in my gut, you know. I like what the teenagers say about free-floating anxiety. They say, look at him, he's wired. You know? And I was wired for a long time. That's some kind of fear, isn't it? Now, if I had to put, and we could go on, we could fill up this whole blackboard with these problems, okay? If I had to put one word on those problems, one four-letter word to describe all those problems, what would it be? Huh?
Hurt.
Hurt or pain. Right? Pain. Pain like this. A friend of mine in California says, the first 15 years of my life, I walked around and it was like I had a big hole in the middle of me with the wind blowing through it. And it hurt. A big hole, and it was raw around the edges, and the wind going through it was cold. And he said other people had this hole and they went and got an education and it closed. I went and got educated, mine got bigger. Other people had this hole and they went to church and it closed. I went to church and mine got bigger. Other people got into relationships, you know, fell in love, things like this, and the hole closed. I fell in love time after time after time. God, do we fall in love? And the hole got bigger. How many of you can identify with that? Got a hole in the middle of me. And he said, what do you tell anybody when they say, what's wrong with you? Well, you see, I got this hole in the middle with the wind blowing through it. You know, straitjacket time. But that pretty well describes it, doesn't it? An emptiness. You understand? A void that will not be filled. And it gave me a continuing sense of dissatisfaction. Whatever I thought was going to fill that hole, I went and got it, and once I got it, I didn't want it anymore. I'd say to myself, so what? What's next? There's got to be more here. And I'm a more kind of person, you see. When drinking, if I felt good, I wanted to feel better. And if there was something beyond better, I was going for that. Nothing was enough. Now you got a hole in the middle of you, the wind blowing through it, you got a lot of pain. What do you look for when you got pain? Relief, right? There it is. You know, you got all this pain in the middle of you, and one day, like me, someone hands you a bottle. And you take a couple of drinks of that flit, or a couple of hits of whatever drug you're doing, and the hole closes. By God, it closes. Never closed before. Nothing has ever done that, you know. And bingo, it's closed. And you're not bored, and you're not lonely, and you're not afraid, and you're not angry, you know, and you're not guilty, and you really feel like you're with them. For the first time in your life, you know, you're satisfied with who you are and who you're with and what you're doing. Did you feel that way? God, that's important, isn't it? You walk around for 10, 15, 20, 25 years with a hole in your middle with the wind blowing through it, and you find a substance that closes it. God, that's important. And you're not even going to begin to understand your alcoholism and drug addiction until you understand the value of alcohol and drugs. Think about it. What's the most valuable thing in your life? What's been the most valuable thing in your life? Tell the truth, not what you wanted it to be. See, I had values. I wanted to be a good person. I wanted to be a good husband. I wanted to be a good father. I wanted to be all those things, and I tried to be those things. But alcohol came first, and you know what happened? Underneath alcohol, all the rest of the values started falling apart. But it was number one, and number two was getting it. Never running out. My whole value system was dominated by alcohol and drugs. Was yours not? Be honest. We don't like it. We don't intend it to be that way, but it is. How valuable. You remember the first little girl you ever fell in love with, Jack? What was her name?
Susie.
John? First little girl you ever fell in love with?
Queen.
Dorothy? First little boy?
Jane.
Who?
Jane.
Gene. Gene got around a lot, folks. Okay? Huh? Mickey, you remember the first little? Okay. Yeah, you can picture her, can't you, in your mind? You know? That's important, isn't it? Mine was Sylvia. Sylvia, she'll remain nameless, okay? Beautiful Sylvia, blonde hair, olive skin, gorgeous. I was Sylvia's paper boy. And I was one of those paper boys that ride around on your bicycle with, no hands on the bars, folding those papers, hitting those porches. I carried 400 papers every morning before I went to school. I was good at it, but I didn't throw Sylvia's up on the porch. When I took hers last, and when I got to her house, I parked my bike and I got off of it, and I lovingly carried her paper up and put it behind her screen door. Now, why did I do that? Because I wanted to see Sylvia. And when I went to school, I stared at Sylvia, and I daydreamed about Sylvia, and I went to bed thinking about Sylvia, and I got up thinking about Sylvia, and I ate my meals thinking about Sylvia, Sylvia, Sylvia. She dominated my life. Y'all remember? And 15 years later, it was alcohol, alcohol, alcohol. That's how important. And so you don't tell an alcoholic or a drug addict to give up the most valuable thing in their life. Like people used to tell me, you're a nice fellow if you just quit drinking. They didn't know how valuable that was to me. They didn't know that without that drug, the hole came up. And I felt like I was going to fly into 1,000,000 pieces any minute. They didn't know that. And I wanted to say to them, what can you give me to replace it? I've got to have this thing, whatever it is that closes the hole. What can you give me to replace it? And all they could tell me was I needed to quit. No replacement. And I wasn't about to give it up, were you? No, sir. No, sir. And if I hadn't found the replacement I found today, I'd still be drinking and drugging. I'll tell you that now. But I've found one. Okay? Very valuable. Now, if all that alcohol and drugs did was to relieve that pain, man, miracle. Miracle drug, But that's not all. Any of you have any side effects? You have any side effects like you staggered a lot, and you fell down, and you lost your car, and you drove your car drunk, and you couldn't remember who you were with and what you did, and your family members helped you become a real good liar because the first thing out of their mouth when you walked through the door was, where you been? I used to go out and stay drunk 3-4 days, come home, first word out of my wife's mouth, Tom, where you been? I didn't know where I'd been. But she's my wife, she deserved an answer, so I made up one. Huh? Who were you with? I didn't know who I was with, but I made up an answer, But the last question on her list always threw me, and it was always the last question. Tom, where's the car? I never knew where the car was, okay? But you see, our family members help us to become good liars by asking all these questions, you see. They don't know that. All right? Side effects. Getting into altercations with those guys in blue suits and those long sticks. Waking up in those rooms with the bars on them, I didn't want to do that. I have a friend that says drunkenness is just a bad side effect of alcoholism. I think he's right. I didn't want to stagger. I wanted to feel good. That's all. Just right. How about this? Any of you have any after effects?
Yeah.
Did you vomit a lot? I hate that word. It sounds a lot worse than puke. You know that? Did you try to and couldn't? Those dry heaves, man, they're good, Feel like your abdomen's coming out your throat any minute. Huh? Did you walk the floor and shake? Did your eyeballs shake a little bit? Huh? Jerk around in your head and you couldn't stop them? Not so much fun, is it? Did you hear music and turn off the radio and it wasn't playing? Did you see those 3D Technicolor movies of rats, snakes? Those of you who haven't, keep on drinking and drugging long enough, you will. People think that 3D and Technicolor were invented in Hollywood. They were not. I've got news for you, and I'm going to fill you in on it. Some drunk invented them when he's in DTs. All right? And if you're really fortunate, you can fall down on the floor and jerk and chew your tongue half in two. And you get up in the morning and you crawl into the john. God, how I hated it. Crawl into it because you can't walk. And shimmy up to it and put your arms around it. Embrace the shimmering waters, And make those quick decisions. My God, which end will I put on first? Y'all have made that decision, haven't you? Have you missed? Now, after effects and side effects fit right into this, don't they? Pain. So isn't it funny? Isn't it ironic the very thing that takes away pain produces more. Ah, but you know how to get relief from pain, don't you? You drink again. And if you want a very simple picture of addiction, there it is right there. You drink to relieve the pain, the result is more pain. And you drink again to relieve that, and it's more pain, and you drink again to relieve that, and it's more pain. It's no answer. And you know what we spend our time doing? In between every 2 binges, we try to figure out how to get that effect, which is so valuable, without all those side effects and after effects. Don't we? And you know we always come up with an answer. And we start telling ourselves the alcoholic and drug addicts lie. This time it's going to be different. This time if I just handle it right, I'm going to be able to drink like everybody else. And we do it again. Okay? Valuable. Now, these problems we've stated up here, do they just come up out of nowhere? What's your name? Yeah. Ginger. Do those problems just come up out of nowhere? You just get angry all of a sudden, guilty all of a sudden, feel sorry for yourself all of a sudden? No, you don't, do you? So those problems are not what's wrong with us. They're symptoms of what is wrong with us. Where did they come from? Now, let me get down to it with you. We're all kinds of people in this room. Tall, short, fat, slim, educated, uneducated, women, men, blacks, different religions. Okay? All these things. And we're different. And we live in a society that stresses our differentness, our uniqueness, our individuality. Am I right? I want to take a different tack. Did you know that we're the same? Did you know that regardless of your age or your sex or your religious preference, or where you came from or how educated you are or how rich or poor you are, that your alcoholism is exactly like my alcoholism, that inside of us there's not an ounce of difference? Think about it. And I'll show you what I mean. Because one of the lies we tell ourselves, you see, is I'm different. When I get that bad, I'll quit. You know, when I'm on Skid Row, I quit. An alcoholic is a person who drinks too much, too long. You know, real drug addicts are laying back in the attic somewhere with a needle in their arm. And if I ever get that bad, I'll quit. I am different. Well, you're not different. An alcoholic is an alcoholic like a rose is a rose, and a drug addict is a drug addict like a rose is a rose. Because the problem is inside, folks. It's an internal problem, not outside. Rich people have it and poor people have it. You know that. All kinds of people have it. But it's the same problem, just like appendicitis is the same problem. Now, what is it in us that's alike? Let me suggest a few things and see if you can agree. I'll describe myself. I'm an idealist. Are there any idealists out there? You know, it was like I came into this world knowing how this world ought to be. And I knew how the people in it ought to be, and I knew how I ought to be. And I looked around me, and the world wasn't, and they sure weren't, and I wasn't either. And I got so hung up on what I thought I ought to be, I didn't have time to be. Any of you feel that way? And I was raised as a little man. Tommy, you're a little man. Little men don't cry. Little men don't lie. Little men are never afraid. Well, I had 3 problems going, you see. Because I lied and I cried and I was afraid. But when my parents, the big people in my life, would ask me if I was afraid, what would I say? No. Look back on your dishonesty. Most of us think we get dishonest after we start using. I got dishonest shortly after I started talking. It seemed like the thing to do. So we're hung up on ought to, you know. Ought to. I seldom use that word anymore. Ought's a bad word. Suppose is a bad word. Obligation, duty. What I do for fun and for free, okay? Not because I got to. But I am an idealist still. Okay? I am also a perfectionist, and I'm going to abbreviate that. Are there any perfectionists out there? Everything's got to be just right at any given time, or it makes me awful nervous or angry. You know? I see a crooked picture on the wall. I cannot stand it. I go in my doctor's office and straighten up his magazines, folks. Do you do that? Do you demand perfection of those you relate to? And do you get uncomfortable when they're not perfect? Do you always go for the top of the heap? In your job, are you the best one? I'll bet you are. Are you going to get there? First place, first place, first place, spotlight, approval, pats on the back. Never second place. And tell me something. When you're not the best in your own mind, do you feel like you're the worst? Huh? That's the way a perfectionist lives, like a yo-yo. Best, worst, best, worst. It'll kill you. It will absolutely kill you. And when things are not the way you want them to be, what do? You try to change them. If it's a person, you try to change that person. If it's a situation, you try to change that situation. And the ugly thing about perfectionism is even when you get it perfect, it's not right. Can you identify with that? I'm talking insides now. Okay. Another one. I'm going to abbreviate this too. Hypersensitivity. I live on feelings, do you? I don't live on thoughts. I live on actions and reactions based on my feelings. I always have. I'm a feeling person. For years, it was like I walked around with my feelings sticking out 50 yards in all directions, and people were always stepping on them. I was more sensitive than I ought to be. I heard a psychiatrist not long ago, and he said alcoholics and drug addicts are stimulus augmenters. Do you know he was one of those? I didn't either. I didn't know what it was, but I always asked questions. I said, sir, what is a stimulus augmenter? He said it's a person that makes mountains out of molehills. And it feels much more deeply than he or she ought to feel. I said, I knew that. I just didn't know I was a stimulus augmenter. You know? Another psychologist told me alcoholics and drug addicts have a lot of cognitive dissonance. Did you know you had that? I didn't know what that was either. And I asked, what, sir, is cognitive dissonance? And he said, it means you're always thinking what you don't want to think, and you can't ever think what you do want to think, and you're always being and doing what you don't want to be and do, and you can't ever seem to be and do what you want to be. And I said, I knew that too. You know? I just didn't know it was cognitive dissonance. Now, when your family comes in here for treatment, don't tell them I told you this. But if they say, what is wrong with you? Say, I'm a stimulus augmenter with lots of cognitive dissonance, and don't you upset me. And if you really want to wow them, tell them what Dr. Harry Tebow said about us. We're alcoholics and drug addicts, he said, characteristic of us is a narcissistic, egocentric core dominated by feelings of omnipotence, intent at all costs on maintaining its own inner integrity. Blow your family's mind. Don't play around. Tell them I thought I was drinking too much, but I found out what's really wrong, you know? Hypersensitivity. And this. I'm a romantic. Any romantics out there? Dreamer. Fantasizer. Love soft lights and music. You know? Love them. Atmosphere. All those things. You know? Dreaming all the time. You know what I dreamed about? What am I going to be when I grow up? You know what I fantasized about? Being somebody else, someplace else, doing something else, with somebody else. And saying to myself, why'd I have to be me? And why'd I have to be here? And why'd I have to be with them? And why'd I have to be doing this? There's got to be something better. And I got into books, you know, and I read about King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. And I used to sit and wonder, and this is the truth, why couldn't I be Sir Galahad? You know? And ride that white horse and ride up to the castle, you know, and put the lance out, and a beautiful maiden comes out and puts a kerchief on the end, and I ride off and kill dragons. Why couldn't I do that? I'm going to tell you, even my dreams didn't work. I knew what I'd do in my britches first dragon I ever saw. And I found out all the great gunfighters in the West one time. I found out they didn't have black hair and black mustaches and dark. Every great killer in the West, check me out if you don't believe it, had blonde hair and blue eyes. Look at me. And I'd say to myself, why can't I be John Wesley Hardin? Matter of fact, why can't I be anybody except who I am? I don't like me. Bingo. I don't like me. And we all got a piece of crying music, you know. We walk into a bar and everybody's so happy they're swinging from the rafters. We walk over to the jukebox, play the saddest song on it. Why is it we do that? And each of us has a certain song that we listen to. It's our crying song, and we drink and play it over and over and over and over and over again, don't we, Ginger? Huh? Get into some Hank Williams stuff, you want to cry. Ooh, get you a bottle, you know, and a Hank Williams record, and sit down and listen to things like, hear that lonesome whippoorwill. He sounds too blue to fly. The midnight train is whining low. I'm so lonesome I could cry. And by God, you do. And you play that record again. Before it's out the last groove, you put it back in the first groove. Get into some low-down, dirty blues, some Muddy Waters. Muddy Waters, good crying music. Good crying music. One thing, baby, I just can't understand. Why you can't be satisfied with just one man. Tell me, baby, and tell me true, how can you love me and my best friend, too? I'd rather drink muddy water. Sleep in a hollow log. God, that's a good get-down song. Take another drink, you know, and play it again. Now, my particular song was a thing by the Four Freshmen, okay? Four Freshmen. Some of you may not remember the Four Freshmen, okay? But they sang this song, and it was called Their Hearts Were Full of Spring, and it's the song that I listened to. There's a story told of a very gentle boy and the girl who wore his ring. Through the wintry snow, their love remained still warm, for their hearts were full of spring. Isn't that pretty? But what I love was the chorus. Then one day they died, and their graves lay side by side on a hill where robins sing. And they say violets grow there the whole year round, for their hearts were full of spring. And God, I'd cry and take another drink and play it again. I was 9 years sober, and I found that old record and started to play it, and my wife went into hysterics. Honest to God, don't play it, don't play it. And I was a little afraid. You know, the connection. And we dream, don't we? God, we dream. Let me tell you a story about dreamers. Any winos and winettes in here? Well, a story told about these two winos, and they were, and you know, winos don't wake up in the morning. I don't know if y'all knew that. Winos shake too. And they shook two under this bridge, and one of them turned to the other one and said, man, I had the best dream I ever had in my life last night. He said, yeah, what'd you dream? He said, I dreamed my mama called me home, gave me $25, and told me to go spend the whole day at Disneyland. And the other wino said, did you go? He said, yeah, I went. I had the best time I ever had in my life. Said, I saw Mickey Mouse, Donald Duck, Goofy. I rode all the rides, listened to all the music, went to all the shows, saw all the pretty girls. Other wino punched him and said, that's nothing. I had a better dream than that. He said, oh, yeah, what'd you dream? He said, man, I dreamed I had a luxury apartment. 2 cases of Jack Daniels. Said, there came a knock on my door, and the 2 most beautiful women you ever saw in your life came through the door and started taking their clothes off. And the other wino was caught up in his story. He said, why didn't you call me? He said, I did, but your mama told me you was at Disneyland. Always dreaming. I'm talking about character. Lots of people talk about personality. Personality is the outer self. It's the self you see. It's the self that's obvious. It's the role that I play, the mask that I wear. It may or may not show you what I really am, and you know that as well as I do. But character is what I am inside. You see how we're alike? And I could add to that list, folks, because I've felt what you felt. I've thought what you've thought, and my attitudes have been your attitudes, and yours have been mine, and you know it, unless you're still lying to yourself, and I hope you're not. Now, is that character the problem? Let me tell you something. Some of the greatest human beings who ever walked the face of the earth had that character. Can you see Lao Tzu up there? Can you see the Buddha? Can you see Jesus? Can you see Abe Lincoln? Can you see Martin Luther King? Can you see Joan of Arc? Yes, you can. So the character's not the problem. We got a beautiful character, but somehow it's killing us. What's the problem? Let me reach down a little bit. I got a psychiatrist friend. I know about 3 sane psychiatrists in the whole world, and this is one of them, okay? And you know what he says? He says, characteristic of every unhealthy person I've ever met in my life is that he or she has an ego that is not submitted to anything or anyone higher than itself. Let me say it again. Characteristic of every unhealthy person I have ever met is that he or she has an ego that is not submitted to anything or anyone higher than itself. Another one says, people get sick because they assume they have power they do not have. Now it sounds ethereal and way out, doesn't it? Well, how many times have you said to yourself, I'll quit drinking this stuff on my own. I'll quit drinking if it's the last thing I ever do. I'll use successfully this time. Did you? Then if you didn't, were you not assuming you had power you did not have? Yes, you were. Okay? And the Buddha says, you want too much for yourself. And because you want so much, you hurt a lot. And he said the answer is real simple. Quit wanting so much, quit hurting so much. And Jesus said you love yourself too much. That's your problem. You are self-centered. That's hard, isn't it? And again, let me say, none of us want it to become that way. But if you want to find out how self-centered you are for the rest of the day, check yourself out. How many times do you say the word I versus the number of times you say the word we or you? Okay. So what these guys are saying is that ego is the problem. I'm going to draw you a picture of your mind up here for just a minute. Didn't know it looked like that, did you, Ginger? Benny, did you know your mind looked like that? I always thought mine was full of holes, but that's, you know, I'm just a model I'm drawing up there for you because I want to show you what happens. Okay? Now, part of that mind is conscious. And it's referred to as ego. Ego is my consciousness of being an individual, separate, unique, okay, apart from everybody else, an entity. Okay? Ego means simply I. Do you know how much of your mind is really conscious? If this whole room were your mind, about that much would be conscious. All the rest is unconscious. Think about that. And in the conscious mind, which we usually think of as some kind of computer that spits out answers, there's a lot of things. In the conscious mind is a whole set of values, things that are important to us. A whole set of beliefs, our opinions about what's true and good and real. That's what beliefs are. A window that we look out at the world and form opinions about what we see, and it's called perception. And a whole pattern of feelings, and a whole storehouse full of memories. And yeah, we have a computer. It's called the intellect, the thinker. And we have a chooser, which is called the will. Do you ever think something was wrong with your will? Huh? The will is the ability to choose what you're going to do and do it. Do you ever tell yourself, I'm going to drink successfully this time, and try it, and couldn't do it? Now, the ego has a job to do. The ego is the manager of the mental company. Do you understand that? And it's the ego's job to bring me pleasure and protect me from pain. And it's also the ego's job to protect everything that is valuable to me. One thing that is valuable to me, I've said, is alcohol. Another thing that's valuable to me is that ideal image, what I think I ought to be. Okay? And we'll get back in a minute. Let's go to the unconscious mind. According to Carl Jung, the psychiatrist, the unconscious mind is divided into two parts. One part he called the personal unconscious, and I call it the basement. And you'll find out why in a minute. What do you put in your basement? One word. Junk. You put junk in the basement in your house, you put junk in the basement of your mind. Make no mistake about it. What the ego does not want to become conscious, it shoves into the basement and keeps it there. There's another part of the unconscious mind, and Jung called it the collective unconscious, and I call it the knower. Do you know there's a part of you and me, John, that knows things we've never experienced? You know there's a part of you and me, Mickey, that contains wisdom and experience which has been passed along to us from our ancestors in the form of chemical codes in our brains? That we know things that we've never experienced. Sound far out? Did you ever go into a strange town? You'd never been there before, but you knew where every building was going to be? Huh? Did you ever pass when you're driving down the road, a certain scene, and you say, I've been in this scene before, but you've never been there before? Ever sit down in a conversation with a friend and you knew what the whole conversation was going to be? Ever listen to a piece of music you never heard before, hear two notes, sing the whole song? Huh? Ever take a walk in the woods, dark of night, And you walk in a straight line, and all of a sudden you walk around. And you don't know why. And you go back in the morning, and there's a big gaping hole there you would have fallen in. Something like that. You ever get the feeling you're being protected? Huh? Believe it. And there's a part of you that knows where to turn. Think back to that last drunk when you was coming off of it and you were shaking and hurting and puking. Did you hear a voice coming out of you saying, God, oh God, please help me? Yeah, you did. And so did I. There's a part of me that knows where to turn in times of trouble. It's automatic. Think about these things. We're something. You don't believe that, but we're something. It's like the psalmist said, I will praise thee, O Lord, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Now, if I were a Christian, I would call the knower the Christ. If I were a Jew, I'd call it the divine spark within me. If I were a Buddhist, I'd call the knower the Atman, the Great Spirit. If I were a psychologist, I'd call it the integrating core of the personality. But whatever it is, it's powerful. You understand what I'm saying? And it's wise. And yeah, in the knower is where the power is. And I'm sorry if you can't see this. I'm using up the board. And it's also where intelligence is. And Ginger, with intelligence, what I'm talking about is intelligence is this. I can recognize what's good for me and what's not, based on my past experience. Okay? Now, when you can't recognize what's good for you and do it and what's bad for you and not do it, that's what I call insanity. Think about your drinking and drugging. Were you able to recognize what was good for you and do it, and bad for you and not? Or did you keep going back to the very thing that was killing you and ruining your life over and over again, telling yourself, it ain't going to kill me. It might kill them, it won't kill me. Now, we protect the ideal image. Kenneth's ideal image, I'm going to pick on him for a minute, is macho man. Very smart, courageous, never afraid. Okay? That's what he ought to be, and he's always believed that. And see, the ego takes orders. But one day, he's afraid. And a friend to him says to him, are you afraid? What does he say? No. Where do you think the feeling of fear goes? Right into the basement. Through what the psychologists call ego defense mechanisms, rationalization, projection, denial, all these things. I'm not getting into that. The feeling is shoved into the basement. And he remembers many times he's been less than courageous. And he thinks many fearful thoughts. And there's a lot that he doesn't know. But what does the ego do? It shoves all the things that don't support the image into his basement. And that is the truth. How old are you? 21 years of junk in his basement. You hear what I'm saying? 21 years of junk, Benny. And some days he walks around and he's so mad he can't stand it. And you ask him what he's mad about, and if he tells you the truth, he says, I have no idea. And he walks around and he's guilty as he can be. And he's done nothing to be guilty about. Do you ever feel that way? And he's depressed and there's no reason for it. Do you ever feel that way? Because see, when you shove these feelings and thoughts and memories into the basement, you lose control of them. And you might bury them, but they're not buried dead. They are buried alive. They create a lot of pain, don't they? Which demands relief. Can you see it? Can you see it? If you have these characteristics and you live in the world we live in, you're going to feel these things. And if you shove those things into the basement, the pain will get so intense that, yes, you feel like you're going to explode any minute, and you have no idea why you feel like you do. You just need relief. But more important than that, you load your basement, you cut yourself off from the knower. You cut yourself off from power, and you cut yourself off from intelligence. And you can't recognize what's good for you, Ginger, and do it, and what's bad for you and not. Am I right? And you can't seem to make an agreement with yourself and keep it. You can't do it. What's missing? Am I talking psychiatric problem here? I am not. I'm talking spiritual problem. Power is, was, and always will be a spiritual concept. And so will intelligence. So you see, we're getting down to it now. Spiritual problem. I don't have the power to be what I want to be and do what I want to do. I know, I've tried. I don't like it, but I don't. Okay. So the ego shuts us off from what it ought not to shut us off from. And what's more, when the ego gets in that position, what happens is not only do we try to put all the bad things out of our mind about ourselves, we try to put them out of our minds about other people. We try to control them, make them into what we think they ought to be. How about alcohol and drugs? Valuable. Do you ever have the experience of coming off one, and you're sick and you're hurting, and what are you saying? I'll never do that again. And you mean it, don't you? I'll never do that again. You know? And then you start feeling well, feeling better, you know? And what's happening while you're feeling better is all the bad thoughts and memories and feelings about that last binge are being neatly shoved into the basement out of consciousness, so that 5 to 7 days later, you know what you're saying? This time it's going to be different. This time I think I can drink successfully. Now if I'm lying to you, I'm dying. And it actually happens. Don't forget it. In many ways, my greatest enemies when I was an active alcoholic were health and success. When things got good, that was bad. Because when things got good, the little monkey would jump up on my shoulder and say to me, hey, you don't need to go to that meeting. That's for bad drunks. You're not a bad drunk. And when the alarm clock would go off, the monkey would pop up and say, you can sleep 15 more minutes, and I'd show up 2 hours late for work. And the monkey never shows his head while you're hurting, just when you're feeling good. Think back on your own drinking. If there was a problem, I worked through a problem. If there was a crisis, I'd work through the crisis. Then, when everything was okay, is when I'd do it. Because I didn't like me, Ginger. I tore down my house. Alcohol didn't do it, I did it. Bottom line, I hated my guts. I was not what I ought to be. I was not perfect. I was extremely sensitive to that. And you see, it has nothing to do with drinking or drugging. It's a spiritual problem. Now, I'm not going to tell you to give up the answer to your problem without suggesting a solution. I am not here to shuck and jive. I want you to know that. I am not here to tell you to do anything I have not already done. I am not here to suggest to you that you believe anything that I don't believe, and you better put that in the bank, because I got a fatal disease and I do not want to die. And you've got one and I do not want you to die. What I want is for you to understand what is really wrong and quit playing games. No shrink can fix you. Not because they're poor, bad people, but because they can't fix you. They don't have the power. No wife, no husband, no friend can fix you. They don't have the power. No minister can fix you. They don't have the power. Who's got the power? Go ahead and say it. You know it. The knower knows it. God's got the power. Am I right? Whoever or whatever he or she is, there's the power. And if what Jung told us is true, part of that power is in us. And we're running all over the place looking for it. And there it is. Closer to us than our next breath. And the great spiritual teachers have said, don't look for the kingdom of heaven in Jerusalem or on the mountain or over here or over yonder. The kingdom of heaven is right in the middle of you. My God, what have you been looking for? So in the next session when we get together, let's go into a solution to this problem. Because there is one. There really is. Okay? Any questions at this point? So the problem, you see, is not the character. It is that the character is under the control of I. And as long as my character, being what it is under the control of I am going to self-destruct. Okay? The ego, the manager of the company, is acting like it's chairman of the board. You hear what I'm saying? It has gotten inflated, and that's our basic problem. Our ego is bigger than it ought to be. Doesn't mean we're in love with ourselves. You think about people with a big ego, oh, he's conceited. He's in love with himself. I never was in love with myself. But there's an opposite end to that. I sure was in hate with myself. Any questions? All right, we'll come back and go into a solution if you're interested. Thank you. For the last session, we talked about what our problem really was. Notice I say our and we and us, because I'm still an alcoholic. I'm always going to be an alcoholic. But now that I've begun the growth process toward real sobriety, that doesn't frustrate me anymore. And you're going to have the same attitude toward it, I hope. It's enjoyable. It's fun to grow. I don't know if you've tried that, but it really is. There was a time when people would say things to me like, "You're a fine fella," and I would say things like, "Well, I'm glad you think so, but I don't see why." You know, which is a put down on yourself, and it's saying, in effect, I'm not lovable and I'm not worth anything, and why do you say those things? And now my kids will come to me and say, "You're the finest father in the whole world," and I'll say, "Ain't it the truth?" You know, but underneath, I'm thanking God for that. And it's quite a change, and it's happened to me through this program of recovery that I'm going to talk with you about, because we are going to talk about the solution to the problem. And let's review for just a minute, if you will. We've said that the problem, basically, in the words of one psychiatrist, was that the ego was not submitted to anything or anyone higher than itself. And again, these are hard facts, okay? And another psychiatrist, in those long words, talked about the narcissistic, egocentric core, dominated by feelings of omnipotence. And if you want me to break that down to you, it's like inside of me, I've got a little baby sitting in a high chair, okay? And the baby's beating on the high chair with a spoon, saying, "Do it, and do it now, and do it my way." Now do you understand what a narcissistic egocentric is? Use the words I, me, my, and mine almost exclusively, without recognizing it, without knowing that I am that way. And the other person who said that we assume that we have power that we do not have, and we get sick. And in the terms I showed you last hour, the ego, whose regular job is to be manager of the mental company, and mind you, I am not talking about annihilating or getting rid of the ego. I've got one, you've got one, we're always going to have one. It's necessary. What I'm talking about is an ego, a manager, that is acting like it is chairman of the board, okay? That is inflated bigger than it ought to be. Now, I'm a very simple person, and I have a complicated disease, and my tendency is to complicate that disease. I complicated it for years, and maybe you have too. If the problem, though, is ego inflation, it seems to me that at least one possible solution would be ego deflation. Bringing my ego down to size so that I could relate to you on an even keel, on an even level. And I'm the kind of person who had to feel superior to you before I felt equal. Do you ever feel that way? I had to feel that I was superior to you. I had to be in control before I was comfortable in any situation. I don't know why. I'm not that smart. I just know that. And deflation of the ego means getting down where it's you and me, and we're kind of on a horizontal, good, equal relationship. Okay? Deflating the ego. Now, some pretty smart men have told us that the ego is deflated only through a spiritual experience. One of those was Carl Jung, J-U-N-G, the psychiatrist, a brilliant man, a humble man, and a good one. If you've never read his work, please do. What a beautiful human being. And what Jung said was that when he was talking to one alcoholic, you're hopeless, absolutely hopeless, unless you can have what I call a vital spiritual experience. And he said they're in the nature of huge emotional and moral rearrangements and displacements, you know. And the set of motives and values that used to dominate your life are suddenly cast out, and a completely new set of motives replaces them. Dr. William Silkworth, another psychiatrist, said that he thought alcoholism was 100% hopeless. Drug addiction, 100% hopeless, unless there was a 100% spiritual change in the person. Okay? Now, these are psychiatrists. Okay? Others told us, among the great spiritual teachers, you must be born again. without preaching to you. You must start all over again. And the Greek word for what he was talking about is metanoeo. And it means like, hey, the light's going on. I can see where I've been going. I don't believe I want to go there anymore. I think I'll change my mind. I think I'll change my attitude. I think I'll turn around and go the other way. That's all rebirth is. And in spiritual terms, rebirth means a turning. In scientific terms, it means a paradigm shift. They have to put big words on everything. I don't understand that either, but that's what it is if you're scientifically oriented. It's a change in your thinking, your attitude, and therefore your behavior. Rebirth. Starting all over again is the solution. Now, the minute we start talking about spiritual things, we get confused, don't we? One thing we get confused about is that science has never accepted spiritual things. You know, I can sit down and talk to some doctors and some research people that I know, and they say, Tom, you must be an awful strong person to have stayed sober as long as you have. And I said, no, I'm not strong. As a matter of fact, I got well when I recognized how weak I was. And they say, well, how did you stay sober? And I say, the grace of God, and you ought to see them. And the looks I get from them. They don't understand that. And if I go on and say, you know, I died. The old me died, and I started all over again. Boy, you really blow their minds then. But that's really what happens. I'm me, but I'm not me. You understand that? Same equipment, but I'm not the same. Something dramatic has happened. Something which is beyond scientific comprehension, you see. Because science has its own gods. Measurement. If you can't measure it, it doesn't exist. Okay? That's one of their idols. They don't admit to that yet. Okay? And if it doesn't fit into natural law, it can't be true. Well, each of us who hasn't had a drink or a drug today is defying natural law. Because an alcoholic's supposed to be drinking, am I right? By definition. And a drug addict's supposed to be using by definition, Benny, but we're not. We don't fit their neat little package. And for 200 years, they haven't mentioned God. You know? At all. Because he doesn't fit into that nice little package either. I'm not putting them down. Science is a marvel. God, they brought us a long ways, you know? They brought us to the point where we blow ourselves off the face of the earth, but we can't even define the human mind. We know all in the world there is to know about outer space, and we know nothing about our inner space. And inside me is a universe more complex than that one out there. And I submit to you that the biggest problems of our day are problems of inner space. Chronic anxiety, chronic depression, alcoholism, drug addiction, cancer. Inner space problem. So we can do all these things, and we can't even tell the basic psychological differences between a man and a woman. And we stay away from the spiritual. And if you want to look at how absurd it's gotten, you see, science has taken and divided and categorized and pigeonholed everything. You know, you go to a doctor now, you go to a series of doctors, don't you? Something's wrong with your foot, you go to a podiatrist. Something's wrong with a bone, you go to an orthopedist. Okay? If you need front end alignment, you go to a urologist or gynecologist. Rear end job, proctologist. Okay? It's like you're a whole bunch of pieces, none of which fits together. You ever notice that? And I'm sorry, but I'm in this deal for wholeness. Wholeness. And wholeness is spiritual. Science talks to us about uniqueness, separation, differences, isolation. The spiritual teachers talk to us about together, relationships, and our samenesses. They even say things like, we're brothers and sisters. Ain't that strange? But on the other side, we get confused. We're confused because of what science, you know, has put into our minds. And on the other side, our religions confuse us sometimes. Because when you mention the word spiritual, some of us want to get on our tricycles and ride off across the clouds looking for God. Don't we? How many times have you heard an alcoholic or a drug addict say, well, if God's in this deal, I'm going back to church and everything will be fixed. Well, I'm sorry. I went back to church so many times to make your head swim. I burn up the aisle in the Baptist church. Every time they sung Just As I Am, or Almost Persuaded, I was almost persuaded. And you see, I wanted God to fix me, Ginger. right now. But you know what I didn't want? I didn't want anything to do with those people in that church. It was me and God, thank you. Let them stay out. Think about that for a minute. My problem never was with God. My problem was with you. I didn't like you. I didn't trust you. You hurt me. So I want you to know, when I'm talking spiritual, I am talking horizontal relationships. I am talking what goes on between you and me, Kenneth. Horizontal. And I'm not out in left field on this, folks. Because the greatest spiritual teachers have told us, have they not? If there's nothing going on horizontally, there never will be anything going on vertically. Am I lying to you? First things first, as they say in AA. First get right here. And then you don't have to go looking anywhere. It just comes. So the spiritual doesn't deal with just God. It deals with you. And it's incomplete unless it includes other people. Relationships were my problem. I couldn't have a good equal relationship. In any relationship, I either had to dominate you or depend on you. And if you look at it for what it is, depending too much on somebody is a form of domination, isn't it? Because you get all their time and attention. I loved it, for instance, when I was in the psycho ward. I never wanted to leave because I was the center of attention. You sit in there and you shave and there's a guy watching you. And I used to love to just move that razor real fast and watch him jump off that stool. That's complete control, folks. And all you had to do was look a little bad and the nurse come running over and pop you in the butt with a needle, and that's what you wanted in the first place. And I had the total of attention of a psychiatrist who recorded me for posterity. You know. Man, that's an egocentric paradise. I loved it. Let's tell it like it is. I believe in that. Okay? So spiritual is here. Any of you read any mythology? You ever read any? It's beautiful. It's simple. They've got a myth to explain almost everything. And I love it. I really do. One of the basic myths that you will read is a myth that says, when we got here, we were all in one piece. You ever read any? It's beautiful. It's simple. They've got a myth to explain almost everything. And I love it. I really do. One of the basic myths that you will read is a myth that says, when we got here, we were all in one piece. Corrected it by splitting us in half. Right, Ginger? Read any creation story in any great religion. Genesis, Gilgamesh epic, any of them. And there's always a split. Male and female created he them. So when we got here, Benny, we were whole. And then all of a sudden, we were split. Incomplete. And one of the deepest longings of every human being, maybe the deepest, maybe you've never thought about this before, John, is to be whole again. Every one of us has a thirst, Kenneth, to be whole again. Each of us has a thirst for union with other human beings. That's a way of being whole, and it's called sexuality. And each of us has a thirst for wholeness, union with a higher power, and that's called spirituality. And they're just like that. And it's in us all. And all of our other needs come out of that. We need to be whole. The effect of alcohol and drugs is this. And stay with me. They take me from loneliness and isolation to wholeness. Did you feel complete when you were just right? With that booze and with those drugs? Sure you did. You know? There's a poet, A.E. Housman, one of my favorite poets, English poet. And Housman was a drunk, and I know that, you know. He wrote a poem one time. He said, ale, man, ale's the stuff to drink for fellows whom it hurts to think. Look into the pewter pot and see the world as the world is not. Isn't that something? And faith is pleasant till 'tis past. The mischief is it will not last. Oh, I have been to Ludlow Fair and left my necktie God knows where, and carried to my home or near pints and quarts of Ludlow beer. And then the world seemed none too bad, and I myself a sterling lad, and down in lovely muck I've lain, happy till I woke again. Then I saw the morning sky. Hi-ho, the tale was all a lie. The world, it was the old world yet, and I was I, and my clothes were wet, and nothing now remained to do but begin the game anew. See why I know he was a drunk? So alcohol and drugs take us there. But you know what happens, Ginger, is we come right back. And when we come back, we're deeper in isolation than we ever were before. So although alcohol and drugs seem to make us whole, put us all in one piece, create relationships, what we always wanted, give us security, take away the fear, take away the anger, they won't last. As a matter of fact, they create more. And that's our illness. Do you ever think of drinking and drugging as a spiritual experience? Huh? That's what it is, Herb. It's a spiritual experience. Does it surprise you that some religions use a lot of drugs? Huh? To produce spiritual experiences? Does it surprise you that what you've always been after was a spiritual experience, John? You know what Carl Jung said? He said, to me, the alcoholic's craving for alcohol is the equivalent on a low level of our natural thirst for wholeness, for union with God. And he went on to say, it is no accident to me that the Latin name for alcohol is spiritus, spirit. That surprise you? It really zings you when you first think about it. Yeah, it's a spiritual experience, second to none. Alcohol did for me what I'd always been told in the Baptist church God was supposed to do. Did drugs and alcohol do that for you? And they did it right now. And they did it every time. There was no waiting. But they killed me. Spiritual experience. So we're not new. Another thing is that science is now validating a lot of what the spiritual teachers have taught us. Have you noticed that? Science has studied so far, they've run head-on into mystery. Head-on into paradox, man. They can't understand it anymore. Robert Oppenheimer, great scientist, helped create that bomb that's going to blow us off the face of the earth and is now sorry for it. Answered a question when he was asked, if you ask me if an electron moves, I'll have to say no. And if you ask me if it stays still, I'll have to say no. And if you ask me if its position changes with time, I'll have to say no. But if you ask me if it remains in the same position, I'll have to say no. And the guy said, that doesn't make any sense. He said, no, it doesn't. It's a paradox. He said, where do we find answers to things like that? And Oppenheimer replied, only from the Buddha and Jesus and the other great spiritual teachers will you find answers to paradox. Okay? Science is learning. For instance, any of you hear of a scientist named Roger Sperry? Any of you? I'm surprised. Sperry won a Nobel Prize in 1981 for his study of the split brain. And he was working with epileptic people. And he was trying to find some way to keep the seizure from spreading from one side of the brain to the other. And so he cut the connecting cord, the corpus callosum, in between the two sides of the brain, and it stopped the spread. Okay? But he found out something he wasn't looking for. That's so often the case with science. He found out that the left side of our brain and the right side of our brain, and listen to me, think and perceive in entirely different ways. The left side of the brain is logical, objective, rational, intellectual, self-centered, dry, like a computer. Okay? But boy, the right side is creative, loving, sees things in terms of relationships, is emotional, is nonverbal, folks, doesn't communicate with words, and is wise. He found all that out. Fantastic discovery. Think back when you went to school, which half of your brain was trained? The left side. Logical, rational, objective, lots of mathematics, lots of grammar, lots of algebra. How much time were you given to daydream? How much time was set aside for art and dancing and music? Could you get up and dance when you felt like it? I did when I was a kid. Matter of fact, when I went to school, I could do two things real good, walk and talk. My first two messages were sit down and shut up. Okay? That's the reason I daydreamed so much. I had to. It was necessary. Fantastic discovery. Okay? Did you ever hear of a little Chinaman named Lao Tzu? Or a religion referred to as Tao? Okay? You know what Lao Tzu said? 1981, Sperry said these things. 2,600 years before, Lao Tzu said something else. He said, friends, there's two of us. And he said, one part of us is rational, logical, objective, intellectual, unfeeling, communicates verbally, very self-centered, dry, you know? And he said it's the light side. And by light, he meant we know a lot about it. Okay? And he said, I call that side the yang. And it's male also, he said. But he said, there's another part of us. He says, dark. We don't know much about it. It's very emotional. It's very creative. It's very loving. It's very wise. Not intellectual, wise. It's very intelligent. It's very powerful. It's very emotional. It's female. And I call it the yin. Did you ever hear the yin-yang? What I'm saying is 2,600 years before Sperry won the Nobel Prize for his discovery, Lao Tzu had already discovered it. And those of you who are Christians, you remember Jesus talking about the mind and the heart? Huh? Do you begin to understand? There are two of us. And science is validating this now. Even Sperry said, I have discovered nothing new. Lao Tzu always knew it. Okay? Another thing, any of you familiar with near-death experiences, what they call NDEs, are you? There's people who are clinically dead and they come back to life. And this has been researched and validated now, okay? And 80% of the people who are brought back have no memory of it. But 20% of them do. And every single one of those 20% tell almost the identical same story about what happened to them. First, they had an out-of-body experience. It was like they were floating on the ceiling, looking down at the doctor working on them. They can tell the doctor everything he did. They can read every machine, and none of them are trained in medicine. And after that, they go through a long tunnel, and it's dark, and it's frightening. And at the end of that long black tunnel, they see this beautiful, warm, loving light. And as they approach the light, the fear leaves. And it's like the light beckons them on. And if they look beyond the light, guess what they see? Green pastures. Friends who have gone on before. And the message the light gives them is, it's not your time. You'll have to go back. And they don't want to. They don't want to. Long black tunnel. Listen to me. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death. Green pastures. Almost sounds like the 23rd Psalm, doesn't it? Validated. Scientists are now talking about the possibility of some existence after death, that we're in a transformational process. And they never talked about that before. Another thing they're talking about is the possibility of healing taking place. Okay? Without medicine. There's a guy at UCLA, David Bressler. He runs a pain clinic. In his pain clinic, he deals with people with chronic pain, not just plain old pain, chronic, terrible pain. He uses no drugs. He uses no surgery. You know what he uses? Prayer, meditation, guided imagination. With great success. Story he tells about a lady who had had double mastectomy and had terrible spreading pains across her chest all the time. She was sent to him. And he asked the lady, please visualize your pain. What does your pain look like to you? She said, you'll think I'm crazy. He said, that's okay, tell me anyway. She said, it's like a huge elephant sitting on my chest and it's crushing me to death. And he worked with her and he instructed her, with her imagination, Ginger, to go to work with the elephant. 3 months, no more pain. And he said, what did you do? Listen, it sounds funny, but it's the truth. She said, I put the elephant on a diet. And he kept reducing in size day by day, visually, imagination, in my mind, until one day he got very thin, he grew ears like Dumbo, and he flew away, and he's never been back. Another man with chronic lower back pain, he said, what's it like? Like a hot poker sticking in my back. He said, I want you to go on a picnic in your imagination. I want you to have a good picnic, and I want you to visualize yourself in a pasture, and running through the pasture is an icy mountain stream. And he said, when you want to, get up and walk over to the mountain stream and sit down in that icy water. And when the icy water hits that hot poker, it's going to shrink it, and when it does, you reach around and pull it out of your back. And he did, and he had no more chronic lower back pain. See, science now knows that our bodies produce their own painkillers. Did you know that? We produce our own tranquilizers, our own sleeping pills, thank you. Morphine doesn't kill pain, it just releases our body's own painkillers. And they have found we can release them through imagination and prayer and meditation. I get high on meditation. Some people get high on running. We understand why now. Makes sense, Ken. You know, used to in a medical school, they'd take a bunch over here with migraine headaches and give them Percodan maybe. And over here, a bunch with migraine headaches and give them sugar pills. Well, some of these would get relief, but some of them would. And you'd have thought the doctors, John, would have said, I ain't giving you anything but sugar pills. How in the world do you get relief? But they're too scientific for that. They throw them out of school. You know, they call them, the doctors call people that got relief from sugar pills quacks, okay? And they call the doctors quacks. And they had the quack controversy. That's what a doctor friend of mine says, you know. But you know, if he had asked, say, Ken got relief, he'd say, Ken, how'd you get relief? I didn't give you anything but sugar pills. You know what Ken might have said? I believed I was going to get relief, and I got relief. Whoa. And Jack comes in to me, and I'm a doctor, and huge growth in his stomach. And I said, Jack, get your affairs in order. You'll be dead in 3 months. You have cancer. And 5 years later, I see him. And he's healthy and happy. I've never seen a man in such good health. Now, you would have thought the scientists would have said, what in the world did you do? We need an answer to cancer. But they'd say, no, must have been a wrong diagnosis. I looked at the wrong x-rays. In other words, they ignored these things. And if he'd asked Jack, Jack might have said, Wilson, you know that job I had, making a lot of money, that was driving me crazy? I quit it. I always wanted to make furniture. I don't know why, and I'm making furniture. And I'm not making a lot of money, but I sure am happy. And you know that woman I lived with for 27 years and I couldn't stand her? I left her. And I'm living out in the country where I always wanted to live, you know. And I'm really having a good time. I don't know when the cancer went away, but it's not there anymore. You can feel if you want to. In other words, I just made a radical change in my lifestyle. And I'm healed. See, there is some basis, in spite of all the quackery and chicanery in faith healing, there is some basis for believing that it is, as a matter of fact, a very powerful tool. That we are fearfully and wonderfully made. That we have within us everything that is needed to get well from cancer. Everything. Alcoholism, drug addiction, anything. Not because we're so great, but because of the connection. Do you hear what I'm saying? We are God's kids. No doubt, Kenny. We are. Now they're beginning to think about those things. You see, my version of spirituality, to wind that up, is it's a horizontal relationship, you and me. And without this, there's no vertical. But if I have this, there is a vertical, and right there in that intersection is the whole meaning of life. Think about it. The horizontal and the vertical, the intersection. That's the whole deal. That's just how simple it really is. What's complicated is how in the world do I get there? That's where I always wanted to be. With the hole in my middle closed. How'd I get there? According to William James, spiritual experiences always include two basic elements. If you want to read his book, you can read the book called Varieties of Religious Experience. He studied all kinds of spiritual experiences. He was one scientist that had guts enough to do it. And he found two common elements. And the first element in a spiritual experience is ego deflation at depth. How about that, folks? You know what we call hitting bottom? That's ego deflation at depth. When you see the truth right in front of you and you can't avoid it any longer, and you know you've had it, that's bottom. That's ego deflation at depth. When the monkey doesn't speak to you and the kid in the high chair is quiet because he has nothing to say. Bottom. And the second element is submission. How about that? Submission to a higher power. Because you sense from somewhere deep in you, said James, that everything's going to be all right if you can get hooked up with a higher power. Ego deflation at depth. I don't know how many of you ever heard of Bill W., one of the co-founders of Alcoholics Anonymous. He went through this. When he was in the hospital withdrawing from his last drunk, he said he felt as if he was in the pit of hell. The whole bottom dropped out. His depression deepened unbearably. Bottom. Ego deflation. And then, Ginger, he heard himself cry out, God, if there is a God, please help me. I'll do anything. And he had it. And he had a big one. So it was like he was lifted to the top of the mountain and a cool breeze, not of air, but of spirit, was surrounding him. And he said to himself, so this is the God of the preachers. And when the experience was over and he doesn't know how long it lasted, Kenneth, he called the psychiatrist in and said, am I crazy? Am I hallucinating? And you know what the doctor told him? After asking him a lot of questions, no, you're not crazy. I don't know what's happened to you. I've read about these things. I've heard about these things. They're called spiritual experiences. He said, but whatever it is, you don't even look the same as you did a while ago. And you better hold on to it. And that's the way AA got started. The trouble is, too many of us look for that big kind of spiritual experience, and most of us have the small kind, you know, the educational variety. It comes slow, and it makes some of us mad, see, because it's too slow. It's like a friend of mine up in Greensboro, North Carolina. They were discussing spiritual experience one night, and he got very worried about it, you know, and he came out of the meeting, and he waited for the old man that he liked the least in the whole group, but he knew the old guy had the answers, okay? And he said, I'm bothered. Y'all were talking about spiritual experience. When am I going to have mine? And the old guy said, how long have you been sober? He said, 4 years. He said, you've had it. Think about it. Doesn't have to be a Moses thing with a burning bush and a big voice. Doesn't have to be a Paul thing where you knocked off the donkey and made blind, Ginger. It's just a gradual change. And you don't think the same, and you don't even realize it. But your eyes start to show it. The mirror of your soul. There's a turning. Okay? Now, ego deflation at depth, submission to a higher power. Two basic elements. Do you understand that? Right? Now, there are many ways to achieve a spiritual experience. One of those ways is called the Sermon on the Mount. That would be the Christian way. One of those ways is called the ethical decalogue, or the Ten Commandments. That would be the Jewish way. One of those ways to a spiritual experience is called the Eightfold Middle Path. That would be the Buddhist way. And one of those ways to a spiritual experience, and the way which seems to work best for us, and I'm not smart enough to know why, is the 12 suggested steps of Alcoholics Anonymous. That's a way to a spiritual experience. If you don't believe me, read the 12th step sometime. It says, having had a spiritual awakening as the result of these steps. That's the only one, Ginger. The result of the 12 steps is a spiritual awakening, a spiritual experience. The light goes on. You turn, you're changed. You're the same, but you're not. And the minute I mention Alcoholics Anonymous to some people, they say, well, that book, that blue book, you know, that was written by a bunch of drunks. What can a bunch of drunks know? I want to tell you something maybe you don't know. Everything in this book was agreed on by the first 100 members of Alcoholics Anonymous. Everything. And when you can get 100 drunks to agree on anything, you had better hold on to it. You understand what I'm saying? They all agreed on it. And look at the magic that they said. See, people think somebody sat down and invented AA. No. It evolved. It evolved from Moses, from Jesus, from Carl Jung, from William Silkworth, from Harry Tiebout, from William James, from religion and science. That's the reason we got a program. The first step in that program says, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol, that our lives had become unmanageable. Chew on that for a minute. We admitted we couldn't drink, and we couldn't quit. We quit assuming we have power that we don't have. We know what the truth is. Alcohol and drugs have me licked. And as much as I try, doesn't seem anything I can do about it. Now, when you admit you're powerless over something and your life's out of control, you think that might deflate your ego a little bit, Ginger? But you see, they weren't done yet, Kenneth. They said, second step, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves, could restore us to sanity. Remember what the psychiatrist said? The ego's unsubmitted to anything or anyone higher than itself. And all of a sudden, the second step says, we came to believe there's a power greater than us who can do what? One thing, restore us to sanity. What am I talking about? Restore me to the point where I can recognize what's good for me, do it, what's bad for me, and not do it. Please keep that in mind. Where I can make an agreement with myself and keep it. Where I can say to myself, I'm not going to drink today, and I don't. But the moment that you believe anything is more powerful than you are, be it a group, a thing, a substance, or a God, you deflate the ego, don't you? And they're not done yet. They just never get done, these old drunks. We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood Him. I submit to you there is not 1 ounce of theology in that statement. None. Put your will and your life in the care of any person, anything, any institution. You've deflated your ego. Have you not? Here we get down to the 4th step, and, we talk about all those feelings and memories and thoughts being down here in the basement and blocking you off from the power. You remember that? And you get to the 4th step, and boy, we scream and holler. Why do I have to go back through my life and write all that stuff down with pencil and paper? I have forgot that. I'm going to tell you something. You never forget anything. Nothing. And why do I have to do that? I don't want to do that. I used to hate my mother, but I don't now. I used to dislike my father, but I don't dislike him anymore. And I just don't see any sense in doing all that. And the 4th step says, made a searching and fearless personal inventory of ourselves. Moral inventory. Huh? You know what it is? You know why you got to take that inventory? What you do is take a pencil and paper and you walk down into the basement of your mind and you list what you find. You list all those feelings, Kenneth, the ones that are eating at you. You list all those memories, Ginger, the ones that are tearing you up. All those thoughts, Jack, that are eating at your guts and causing all that colitis and heartburn and ulcers and heart attacks and brain explosions. Huh? If you think those are physical, you better think again. Repressed feelings and memories will devour you. They'll eat you alive. So what do? You put them on a piece of paper and walk up out of your basement. And they're not there anymore. Huh? Does that make simple sense to you? And you ask yourself a basic question in inventory. What in the world has been the matter with me? And you go down there and you clean it out and you walk up the steps again, and guess what? Basement's clear, folks. It is clear. And then magic happens. You get out of Charlotte Treatment Center and you go out to a party somewhere and the drinks come around and they offer you one ginger and you say, no thanks. And you don't take one. My God, you don't take one. And you don't explain, well, you see, I'm an alcoholic. You don't justify. You don't rationalize. You say, no thanks. And you're out on the street and your favorite dealer comes up and says, man, I got some good stuff here. And you say, no thanks, not today. And you don't. something's been added. You've made the decision, but now, guess what? You have the power to carry it out. I submit to you, you are not the same anymore. You're not. You got something that's been missing. You recognized what was bad for you and said no to it, didn't you? Man, the whole world hangs by a thread sometimes. You know that? The whole world hangs by a thread. For an alcoholic and a drug addict, that thread is this. No thanks. You understand that, Benny? No thanks. And you don't take one. Man. And sometimes we get all upset. You know, get upset out at the treatment center because of all these problems and everything. And you go to bed at night and somebody says, what kind of day did you have? I had a lousy day. I'm going to tell you something. You better think again. If you went through that day without one drink or one pill, it has been a fantastic, incredible day. Don't expect a goody truck. God ain't got one. He's not a clerk in the universal supermarket. And just because you ain't drinking and drugging doesn't mean your life's going to change overnight. I said before, you got to work at it. And the people who recover and find real sobriety, work at it. But they're not without help. I don't understand God, okay? I don't even care what you call your concept of God. I just know one thing. I'm very aware of one thing. Either I'm a lot smarter than I think I am, or there's something taking good care of me. And I look around me every day. I watch. I've gotten into watching. And I dare you to do it. I dare you to do it. Watch for the rest of the day how many things happen for your good that you don't have anything to do with. And then tell me there's not a higher power. Then deny there's some grace. But don't do it till you watch. God, it's incredible. I'll tell you a story. Jim Emmert, the director of this center, and I were sitting one day talking about getting a guy to work in a school of alcoholism and drugs, and we were talking about a certain guy doing a track on sexuality. And Jim says, we'll have a theme song for that. And I said, well, what would that theme song be? And he said, Mary Magdalene's song from Jesus Christ Superstar. I don't know how to love him. I said, that's dynamite, man. Really sounds good. We finished the conversation, went out and got in Jim's car. He turned on the radio. You want to guess what was playing? I don't know how to love him. Gifts, man. Gifts. And they come fast and furious. And we get depressed because we latch on to the bad things and don't even notice the good things. Wow. Start watching. I dare you. And then as you go along in the 12 steps, if you'll look at them very closely, they move you right along this path in very small increments towards that state which is called wholeness. That's exactly what they do. That's exactly what they're designed for. Nothing else. Alcoholics Anonymous is not a program designed to help you quit drinking. Quitting drinking is a prerequisite. Same thing is true of NA and drugging. What they're offering you here in this program is a new life. A way of living which does precisely for you what alcohol and drugs did, only better. I'm going to tell you something. I wouldn't trade the worst day that I have now for the very best one that I had when I was drinking and drugging. Inside of me, when the whole world's falling down around me, I got a little cassette that goes off. I guess it's a cassette. And it says something like, hey, dummy, everything's going to be all right. And I believe that, Ginger. And it is. Okay? And don't go looking in theology or anywhere else for the higher power that you need. Remember, it is closer to you than your next breath. And when you begin to get all that garbage out of your basement, guess what? It begins to express itself. and you're no longer the same. And now that character that I was talking about, the idealist, the perfectionist, the romantic, the sensitive, that's me. But I have a new director. And the same things that were killing me are giving me life. In religious terms, not one cubit has been added to my stature. Just a different director. Still an idealist, still a perfectionist, sensitive. I cry a lot for other people now, more than I do for me. I'm a perfectionist, so I'll never get enough of what I'm getting. Program's built for me. I'm a dreamer. And what I'm dreaming right now is that every one of you, please God, latch into this thing and become what you really are. Because truly, you're wonderfully and fearfully made. And I mean it. You're never going to know it till you find out. I appreciate it.